The story of this man did not begin with sickness. It began with success. From the outside, he was a figure of power, a billionaire who built his empire with vision and relentless work. People spoke his name with respect. Business magazines printed his face on glossy covers. Television networks described him as the man who could turn anything into gold. For decades, everything he touched seemed to rise in value. He was living the dream that millions only wished for. Private jets, luxury cars, homes in every corner of the world, he had it all. But behind the glass walls of his mansions, a very different reality was waiting for him. The truth was, he was sick. Not just tired or stressed, but deeply unwell. His illness was not something he could hide from forever. It had crept into his life slowly, like a shadow that refused to leave. At first, it was only small things, a little pain here, a little weakness there. He told himself it was nothing. After all, he was a strong man, a man who had built his wealth through endless hours of work. He believed his body would listen to his will, just like his businesses did. But the body has its own rules. And as the years passed, those small pains grew into serious problems. Money, in his world, was the solution to everything. If a building needed fixing, he hired the best team. If a deal needed saving, he brought in the smartest minds. So when his health started to fail, he did the same thing, he called the best doctors. He flew across the world to see specialists. He booked entire hospital floors just for himself. He tried experimental treatments, new drugs, and alternative methods. Each time, the doctors told him, "This will help. This is the way forward." Each time, he paid without blinking, because money was not the issue. The issue was his body, which refused to cooperate. Slowly, disappointment began to eat at him. He would walk into a hospital filled with hope, but leave with the same pain, the same questions. Sometimes he felt a little better for a while, but it never lasted. The illness always returned, like an unwanted guest. And every time it returned, it seemed stronger, like it was mocking his efforts. Friends noticed the change first. They remembered the man who used to laugh loudly at dinners, who told stories with a sparkle in his eyes. Now, his smile was weaker. His laughter was shorter. Sometimes he excused himself early, saying he was tired. Business partners noticed too. The man who once closed deals with energy and confidence now looked distracted, sometimes even defeated. He no longer chased opportunities with the same fire. For someone who had spent his whole life moving forward, slowing down felt like failure. At home, his family felt the distance. He loved them deeply, but he could not bring himself to talk about his illness. He thought silence would protect them, but instead, it built invisible walls. His children saw him growing weaker, his wife saw him fading, but none of them could reach him fully. He felt ashamed that, despite all his wealth and power, he could not protect himself from this unseen enemy. Late at night, when the world was quiet, he would sit alone by the window of his grand home, staring at the city lights. He thought about his life, how far he had come, how much he had gained, and yet how little it mattered now. What use was a private jet when you could not walk without pain? What joy was there in luxury meals when your body could not digest them properly? He often whispered to himself, "I would give it all away if I could just feel normal again." The more treatments failed, the more hopeless he became. He had spent millions, maybe even billions, chasing a cure. But each new doctor, each new therapy, was just another chapter in the same story of disappointment. He began to wonder if healing was something money simply could not buy. There were days when he locked himself in his study, not wanting to see anyone. Papers piled up on his desk, business reports, contracts, proposals, but he could not focus. His mind was always on his illness. He felt trapped inside a body that no longer obeyed him. For a man who had built skyscrapers and industries, this was the deepest kind of helplessness. His staff noticed it too. The once demanding, energetic boss now moved slowly, his voice softer, his instructions shorter. Some whispered behind closed doors, wondering if the empire would survive his condition. Others simply felt pity, knowing the pain he carried but unable to help. What hurt him most was not the physical pain, though that was real and heavy. What hurt him most was the loneliness that came with it. Illness, he discovered, was not just a battle of the body, it was a battle of the spirit. People could surround you, but inside, you felt alone. And he, a man once surrounded by admirers, felt lonelier than ever. Still, he refused to give up entirely. There was always another treatment to try, another expert to consult. He told himself, maybe the next one will be the answer. But deep down, he began to lose faith. He started to prepare quietly, not for recovery, but for the possibility that his time might be shorter than he imagined. He began writing letters to his children, letters he hoped they would never need to read but feared they might. This was the hidden life of a billionaire who seemed to have everything. The world saw his cars, his homes, his business empire. They did not see the man waking up at night in pain, holding his chest, staring at the ceiling, wondering how it all came to this. They did not see the pills lined up on his bedside table, the medical reports stacked in drawers, the hospital gowns folded in closets. They did not see his tears when the doctors said, "We will try something else," but could not promise hope. His life had become a paradox. The richer he became, the poorer he felt inside. The more property he owned, the less control he had over his own body. It was as if life was teaching him a cruel lesson that no amount of success can shield you from suffering. And so, after years of chasing cures, he found himself in a place he had never been before: hopelessness. For the first time in his life, he felt truly powerless. Not even his billions could buy him peace. He wondered if perhaps this was his destiny to be remembered as the man who had everything but could not keep his health. Yet, little did he know, his story was far from over. Healing would not come from the gleaming walls of hospitals or the polished words of doctors. It would come from a place he never expected, and from a person he never imagined would play such an important role in his life. But that part of the journey was still ahead, waiting quietly in the shadows, preparing to surprise him. The billionaire's journey with doctors and treatments stretched over many years, and with each passing year, his hope grew smaller. At first, he carried confidence. He would walk into hospitals with his head high, believing that science and wealth could solve anything. He told himself, if there is a cure anywhere in the world, I will find it. And so, he began a long journey across countries and continents, chasing the promise of healing. One year he traveled to Europe, where a famous doctor promised a new kind of therapy. The treatment was expensive and experimental, but that never worried him. He had more money than he could ever spend, and he was willing to pay any price for health. For weeks, he stayed in a private clinic, surrounded by the latest machines and the most educated staff. The doctors spoke with confidence, and he clung to their words like a drowning man clings to a rope. But after all the injections, tests, and therapies, the same pain returned. His body did not listen. The next year, he went to Asia, where he tried ancient practices combined with modern science. He drank bitter teas, swallowed rare herbs, and followed strict diets. For a short while, he felt lighter, as if his body was responding. But soon, the weakness returned. The hope that had flickered for a moment was once again dimmed. In America, he visited top research hospitals. Teams of doctors surrounded him, studying his case, running tests that cost more than what an ordinary person would earn in a lifetime. They tried new medicines, even procedures still not approved for the public. He became like a test subject for the most advanced science of the age. But nothing gave him lasting relief. Every time he left a hospital, he carried a heavier heart than before. And it wasn't just the physical pain, it was the emotional exhaustion. Imagine waking up each day believing that maybe, today, things will change. You spend millions, you trust brilliant minds, and you follow every instruction. But then you open your eyes tomorrow, and the same pain is still there. That was his life, day after day, year after year. Soon, the treatments began to blur together. He could no longer remember which pills he had tried, which diets he had followed, or which therapies he had endured. All he remembered was the constant cycle: hope, effort, disappointment. Hope, effort, disappointment. The pattern became his life. His family watched this with heavy hearts. They saw the man they loved slowly lose his spark. His children grew worried, often suggesting he should stop chasing treatments and focus on resting. But he was stubborn. He could not accept defeat. He thought, if I stop trying, then I have already lost. And so, even when he was tired to his bones, he continued searching, continued paying, continued believing that maybe the next door he opened would lead to light. But as the years went on, his body began to show the weight of the struggle. His once strong frame grew thinner. His movements became slower. There were mornings when he could not even get out of bed without help. The man who had once commanded boardrooms with authority now struggled to command his own legs. And with every weakness came shame. He hated being seen as fragile. He hated being pitied. He avoided public gatherings, turning down invitations, choosing instead to sit alone at home. Friends whispered about him. Some said he was cursed. Others said maybe his success had come at too high a price. But none of them truly knew what he was going through. Only he knew the lonely battle that took place inside his body every single day. One of the hardest parts was dealing with disappointment from doctors. Each time he met a new specialist, there was always that first moment of hope. The doctor would look him in the eye and say, "We have a plan. We will help you." And he would feel a small flame of belief ignite in his heart. But then, after weeks or months, the results would vanish, and the same doctor would shrug and say, "We will try something else." Those words became his nightmare, something else. How many something elses could there be before the end? Sometimes, he sat in his study surrounded by stacks of medical files, flipping through pages filled with words he did not understand. Charts, numbers, test results, it all blurred together into a language of disappointment. The more he read, the more helpless he felt. Money could buy paper, reports, and time, but not the healing he craved. His staff, too, began to feel the difference. The billionaire who once worked 12-hour days now disappeared for weeks into hospitals. Meetings were postponed, projects delayed. He still had wealth, but the empire he had built with his bare hands began to slow. Investors noticed his absence. Journalists whispered about his condition, though no one knew the full truth. He became a mystery, powerful yet broken, rich yet searching for something money could not deliver. At night, he often found himself crying quietly. He did not let anyone see, not his wife, not his children, not his employees. But in the darkness, the tears came freely. They were not just tears of pain, but tears of exhaustion, of loneliness, of fear. He wondered if this was how his life would end, not with power, not with joy, but with endless visits to clinics and hospitals. There were moments when he thought of giving up. He imagined stopping all treatments and letting his body decide its own path. But then, something inside him refused. Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps it was the memory of his struggles in his younger years, when he built his fortune from nothing. He had never accepted defeat before, and he didn't want to start now. But still, his spirit was tired. Each passing month, the people closest to him noticed that his voice carried less certainty. When he used to speak, people listened. Now, when he spoke, there was a tremble, a weariness. He no longer sounded like the man who once stood at the top of the world. And yet, even as his hope was fading, he still chased answers. He still boarded planes, still met doctors, still paid for treatments. But inside, his faith in medicine was breaking. He began to believe that maybe healing was something more than pills and procedures. Maybe it was something beyond the reach of science. But he didn't know what that something was. All he knew was that he hadn't found it yet. His world, once filled with victory, had shrunk to a cycle of hospitals, pain, and restless nights. The more he tried, the more hopeless he became. And in this hopelessness, he began to feel truly powerless for the first time in his life. It was in this state of deep exhaustion that he reached a silent conclusion: perhaps his story was nearing its end. He quietly began preparing himself. He started writing notes of gratitude to his children, messages of love he hoped they would hold onto. He started letting go of some business responsibilities, handing them over to trusted managers. It was as if he was slowly saying goodbye to the world he had built. But life, as it often does, had a different plan for him. Healing was waiting for him, but not in the hospitals he had searched, not in the medicines he had swallowed, and not in the millions he had spent. Healing was hiding in the most ordinary place, ready to surprise him in the most extraordinary way. And soon, on a quiet evening in a small diner, that surprise would begin. One evening, after yet another round of treatments that had left him more drained than before, the billionaire found himself on a lonely road far from his usual surroundings. He had asked his driver to take a different route, away from the bright city lights and the noise of luxury. He wanted silence, something that felt real and human, not polished or artificial. The journey took him through small towns, places he had never cared to notice before. These were towns where people lived simple lives, where homes were modest, and where hard work was the only wealth many knew. As the car moved through one such town, his stomach growled softly. He realized he had not eaten properly all day. His appetite had been weak for months, but at that moment, he craved something simple. Looking out the window, he spotted a small diner at the corner of a quiet street. Its neon sign flickered, half broken, but the warm light inside looked inviting. It was not the kind of place a billionaire would usually enter, but that night he was not thinking about wealth or image. He was simply a tired man who wanted to sit down and eat. He asked the driver to stop, and for once, he told him to wait outside. He wanted to be alone. Pulling his coat tighter, he walked slowly toward the door and pushed it open. The little bell above the entrance rang, announcing his arrival. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee, fresh bread, and fried food. A few locals sat in booths, chatting quietly. Nobody looked up or recognized him. For the first time in a long time, he felt invisible, and strangely, that felt comforting. He chose a small booth by the window and sat down. A few minutes later, a waitress walked over with a smile. She was a black woman in her 40s, wearing a simple uniform and an apron that had a few stains from the busy evening. Her smile was genuine, not forced, and her voice carried warmth as she said, "Good evening, sir. What can I get for you?" He looked at the menu but found himself staring blankly. His appetite was small, and nothing seemed appealing. She noticed his hesitation and asked kindly, "Not sure what you're in the mood for? I can bring you something light if you'd like. Our chicken soup is simple but good." For some reason, her words touched him. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it, with care, like she actually noticed him. He nodded slowly. "Yes, soup will be fine." As she left to bring his order, he leaned back in the booth and sighed. He felt the weight of his illness pressing on him again. His face looked tired, his body weak. He had grown used to people treating him as a business figure, a billionaire, or a patient. But here, in this small diner, this woman had spoken to him like a human being, nothing more and nothing less. When she returned with the soup, she placed it gently in front of him and asked softly, "Rough day?" He was surprised by her question. Most people never asked him anything personal, not even doctors. They only talked about numbers, results, money. He looked up at her, and for a moment, he wanted to brush it off, to say something simple like yes and leave it at that. But there was something in her eyes, kindness, understanding, that made him pause. Against his usual nature, he said quietly, "rough years." She nodded, as if she understood without needing details. "Sometimes life keeps throwing storms at us," she said. "But storms don't last forever. They pass, and the sun comes back." Her words were simple, but they hit him harder than any speech from the expensive doctors he had paid. He stirred the soup slowly, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. He hadn't realized how much he missed hearing such simple comfort. As the evening went on, they spoke more. He didn't tell her who he was or how much money he had. He simply spoke as a man who was tired, who had been searching for healing and finding none. She listened patiently, never interrupting, never rushing him. Then she shared something unexpected. "My grandmother," she said, "used to take care of people in our community when they were sick. We didn't have money for doctors, so she used old remedies, things from nature, things passed down through generations. She always told me that sometimes the body needs medicine, but sometimes it also needs spirit, love, and faith. Without those, no treatment really works." The billionaire listened closely. He had heard hundreds of doctors speak about science, but this was different. This was not about machines or chemicals, it was about the human heart. She told him about a simple mixture her grandmother used to prepare, something made with natural herbs and ingredients. "It won't hurt you," she said with a gentle smile. "It's nothing fancy, just something that's helped people I know. But more than that, it's about believing you can heal. Because sometimes, when we give up inside, the body follows." For a moment, he wanted to laugh. He had spent billions on the most advanced treatments in the world. Could something so simple really matter? But then, he looked at her again. She wasn't selling him anything, wasn't asking for money. She was just sharing a piece of wisdom from her grandmother, out of kindness. And that made him take it seriously. He finished his soup slowly, feeling calmer than he had in weeks. When she brought him the check, he thanked her quietly. She smiled again and said, "Don't lose hope. Healing can come when you least expect it." As he stepped back outside into the cool night air, her words echoed in his mind. For the first time in years, he felt something stirring inside him, not excitement, not confidence, but something softer, a small spark of hope. Back in the car, he sat silently, holding on to that spark. He thought about the countless hospitals, doctors, and treatments he had tried. None of them had spoken to him. The way the next morning, the billionaire woke up with the waitress's words still echoing in his mind. Her gentle voice had cut through the fog of hopelessness he had been living in. It wasn't just her suggestion of a simple remedy, it was the way she had spoken to him, with sincerity and compassion, something he had not felt in years. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about how strange it was that, after all the hospitals and treatments, it was a conversation in a small diner that had touched him the most. Later that week, he asked his assistant to quietly search for the herbs and ingredients the waitress had mentioned. He didn't tell anyone why. He didn't want to explain. To the world, it might have sounded foolish for a billionaire to chase an old folk remedy after spending billions on modern medicine. But inside, he thought, what do I have to lose? He had tried everything else, and nothing had given him real peace. When the herbs finally arrived, he instructed his private chef to prepare them exactly as the waitress had described. The mixture was simple, nothing impressive to look at. It didn't come in a shiny bottle or with a long scientific explanation. It smelled earthy, even a little bitter. He looked at it for a long time before finally drinking. At first, nothing dramatic happened. He didn't feel a sudden surge of energy or a magical disappearance of pain. But over the next few days, something small began to shift. It wasn't the kind of improvement the doctors measured on charts. It was more subtle. He began sleeping better at night. His appetite slowly returned. His pain, though still there, felt lighter, less sharp. For years, he had woken up each morning dreading the day ahead. But now, when he opened his eyes, he didn't feel crushed by despair. He felt, steadier. And strangely, it wasn't just the mixture itself. It was what it represented. Each time he drank it, he remembered the kindness in the waitress's eyes, the way she spoke with belief in healing, not in terms of money or status, but in terms of faith and spirit. That belief began to rub off on him. For the first time in years, he started telling himself, maybe I can still get better. His family noticed the difference first. One morning, his wife remarked, "You look brighter today." His children noticed him sitting with them at breakfast longer than usual. His staff observed that his steps, though still careful, seemed less heavy. Even in meetings, he began to speak with more focus, his words carrying a little more strength. It was as if a curtain had lifted from his spirit. Week after week, he continued the simple routine. Some days were better than others, but overall, he felt more alive. And more than the physical change, it was the emotional healing that surprised him. He realized he had been carrying a weight of hopelessness heavier than his illness itself. The waitress had unknowingly given him more than a remedy. She had given him back the courage to believe in life again. One afternoon, as he sat in his study, he reflected on his journey. He thought about the endless hospitals, the millions spent, the countless experts. All of them had spoken to him about his body, about numbers and procedures. But not one had spoken to his heart. That was the missing piece. He realized that healing is not only about science. It is also about kindness, faith, and the willingness to believe that life can still surprise you with good things. Over time, he began combining the natural remedy with a healthier lifestyle. He walked more, breathed in fresh air, and allowed himself to slow down. Instead of constantly fighting his illness like an enemy, he started treating his body like a friend, listening to it, caring for it, and being patient. The change was remarkable. Months later, when he went back for routine medical check-ups, even the doctors were surprised. His condition had improved in ways they could not explain fully. Numbers that had been stubborn for years now showed progress. They asked him what he had been doing differently. He smiled but said little. How could he explain that the secret was not just in herbs, but in the compassion of a woman who worked in a small diner? He knew in his heart that it wasn't only the physical remedy that mattered. It was the way she had looked at him when everyone else had seen only a patient or a billionaire. She had seen a human being in pain. And in that moment, she had given him what money could not buy: hope. As his health improved, so did his spirit. He began attending more family dinners. He laughed again, something his children hadn't seen in years. He even started traveling, not for treatment, but for enjoyment. For the first time in a long time, he was living, not just surviving. Yet he never forgot the diner, the waitress, or her grandmother's wisdom. The memory stayed with him like a quiet light in his soul. Sometimes at night, he would close his eyes and hear her words again: storms don't last forever. They pass, and the sun comes back. The billionaire often wondered what would have happened if he had not stepped into that diner that night. Perhaps he would still be lost in the endless cycle of treatments and disappointment. Perhaps he would have given up. But because of that one unexpected encounter, his life had taken a new direction. And the most powerful realization he carried with him was this: healing is not always about finding the most expensive solution. Sometimes, it is about opening your heart to the simplest acts of kindness, the ones that remind you to keep going. He thought often about going back to the diner, not just to thank the waitress, but to tell her how deeply she had changed his life. For now, though, he kept her words close, using them as a daily reminder that even in the darkest times, light can appear from the most unexpected places. The billionaire's story, once filled with despair, was now becoming a story of renewal. And all of it had started not with money, not with power, but with the compassion of a stranger who had chosen to see him, truly see him, when no one else did. Time passed, and the billionaire's life began to take on a new rhythm. The illness that had once dominated his days was still part of his life, but it no longer controlled him. His body was stronger, his spirit lighter, and his heart more open. He no longer woke up every morning with fear in his chest. Instead, he opened his eyes with gratitude. Gratitude for the little improvements, gratitude for the moments with his family, and gratitude for the unexpected gift he had received from a woman he had only met once in a small roadside diner. As his health improved, he started to reflect on everything he had learned through his long struggle. For years, he had believed that money was the ultimate solution to all problems. And in many ways, money had protected him, given him comfort, and opened doors. But when it came to his health, when it came to healing, money had shown its limits. He had spent fortunes without finding peace. And yet, one simple conversation, one simple act of kindness, had shifted his entire journey. This realization humbled him. He no longer saw himself as the powerful man who could control everything. Instead, he saw himself as a man blessed to have been reminded of life's simple truths. He realized that sometimes the greatest treasures are not bought with gold or dollars, they are found in human connection, in compassion, in the wisdom passed down through ordinary people. With this in his heart, he made a decision. He would not let this gift end with him. He wanted others to feel the same light that he had found. And so, he began to give back in ways he had never done before. The first thing he did was return to that same diner. He went quietly, without his usual entourage, without his expensive suits. He wore simple clothes, wanting to walk in as just another man. The bell above the door rang again, just as it had the first time. And there she was, the same waitress, busy serving tables, her smile as warm as ever. When she recognized him, her eyes widened in surprise. She had not expected to see him again, and certainly not to hear the story he was about to tell. He sat at the same booth and asked for soup, just like before. When she brought it to him, he looked into her eyes and said, "You changed my life." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "I don't know about that, sir. I only shared what my grandmother taught me." But he insisted. He told her how her words had given him hope when he had none left, how her grandmother's remedy had eased his pain, and how her kindness had been more powerful than any doctor's treatment. As he spoke, her eyes filled with tears. She had never imagined that her simple act of compassion could mean so much to someone, especially someone the world saw as untouchable and powerful. He then asked her about her life. She told him about her struggles, about working long hours to provide for her children, about the community she lived in where healthcare was often out of reach. She spoke with honesty, without self-pity, simply sharing the truth of her world. The billionaire listened, and for the first time in a long time, he felt deeply connected to another human being, not through wealth, not through status, but through shared humanity. That day, he made her a promise. He promised to use his wealth not just for himself or for business, but to help people like her, people who carried wisdom and strength but lacked resources. He began by supporting her directly, helping her family, improving her home, and making sure her children had opportunities for education. But he didn't stop there. He also funded healthcare projects in her community, building small clinics where people could access both modern medicine and natural remedies. He named these projects after her grandmother, honoring the wisdom that had been passed down. He believed that healing should not be limited to the wealthy or the privileged, it should reach everyone, no matter where they lived or how much money they had. News of his actions spread, but he never sought attention for them. When reporters asked why he was investing in these communities, he simply said, "Because someone once gave me hope when I had lost it. And now I want to pass that hope on." His family, too, felt the change in him. He was more present, more patient, more joyful. His children said it was like having their father back. His wife said she felt like she was seeing the man she had first fallen in love with many years ago. The illness was still there, but it no longer defined him. What defined him now was gratitude, kindness, and the desire to serve. In his business, he also changed his approach. He no longer chased profit alone. He began focusing on projects that had a positive impact: clean water systems, sustainable energy, and healthcare innovations. For him, success was no longer about numbers on a balance sheet. It was about lives touched, about people helped, about hope restored. And every time he thought of this new chapter in his life, he always went back in his mind to that small diner, that evening when a simple waitress had looked at him and seen more than his illness, more than his wealth. She had seen his humanity. That was the moment his story began to change. In quiet moments, he often shared this story with friends and family. "Do you know what healed me?" he would ask. People expected him to name a doctor, a medicine, or a hospital. But he always shook his head. It was compassion. It was hope. It was the kindness of a stranger who reminded me that storms don't last forever. His story became an inspiration to many. People who had lost faith in life found strength in his words. They realized that healing is not only about what doctors can do, but also about what we believe, how we care for one another, and how we choose to live with courage. And so, the billionaire's legacy changed. He would not only be remembered as a man who built wealth but also as a man who rediscovered life through the simplest act of kindness. The world might still call him a billionaire, but in his heart, he knew that his greatest fortune was not money, it was hope. In the end, his life became a living message, that healing can come from unexpected places, that a stranger's kindness can change everything, and that no matter how dark the storm may seem, the sun always returns. And somewhere, in that small diner on the corner of a quiet street, a waitress could smile knowing that her grandmother's wisdom had reached further than she had ever dreamed, touching not just one man's life, but thousands through him. Because sometimes, the cure we are searching for does not come from wealth, science, or power. Sometimes, it comes from the simple, timeless power of compassion.